Hello, hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse, and before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders, Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Some Dude 267, and Longsight. You are the reason why this content remains bovine? No, that's not even remotely accurate, actually. Maybe it is for today, though, as today we are going to discuss another situation of a train versus something weird and unusual. And this was a suggestion after the moose thing. Some people pointed out, hey, what about cows? And, yeah, there's actually a lot of times where a train has encountered a cow, and we're going to focus on one such incident. This is the story of the Polmont Rail accident. Now, admittedly, this may seem a little less weird than some of the things I've talked about, since the idea of a cow straying from a farm and finding its way on railroad tracks isn't unheard of. I mean, there was a Thomas the Tank Engine story about that. Cows escape all the time, and trains have been held up or run over cows before. I mean, there is literally a part of old school trains that is sometimes called a cow catcher. So the fact that this has happened really isn't that surprising. But let's discuss, what is a cow exactly? Like, what are we talking about when someone says cow? Because there's a lot of different bovines out there. Well, the cow we're specifically talking about today is a member of the generic cow family, also known as Bos taurus. But kind of like dogs and cats, cows have different breeds that look a little bit different from each other, even though they're technically the same species. This one was known as an Ayrshire, a type of dairy cow that originated in Scotland. They're typically red and white, sometimes brown, and they're known as a particularly hardy breed, able to deal with rough weather, as well as producing a decent amount of milk. They're also known to be a little bit grumpy, which might explain why one escaped and encountered, well, a train. The train in question was pushed, more on that in a second, by a Class 47, which I've brought up occasionally before, which operated under, yes, British Rail, and it was developed in the 1960s by Brush Traction. Now, I know 1960s and diesel-electric might be a significant red flag involving anything British Rail, but the 47s actually turned out alright. They were one of the few successes of that era, and 51 are actually still in service, believe it or not. They went through a lot of different modifications over the years, and this one in particular was developed in the late 70s and known as a Class 47/7. What's the difference? Well, they were equipped with long-range fuel tanks to take up longer lines, but the big difference was that they were equipped with TDM, time division multiplexing, push-pull equipment, so it could operate as a push-pull train. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, it's actually quite literal. Push-pull configurations are a type of arrangement usually used for passenger trains that allows the locomotive to push or pull the train depending on which direction the train has to go. The idea is to increase efficiency because it can be very time-consuming to have the locomotive uncouple, then go all the way to the other end of the train, and then pull it from the other end. Why not just push it back the way you came and save a little bit of time? Some configurations involve two different locomotives, one at each end, but the one that was going on today actually involved a control car, specifically a drive-brake standard open car, that were introduced in 1979. A control car is, well, kind of like a subway or a metro car in a sense that there's a small cab at one end for the driver, but it's able to control the locomotive from the opposite end of the train. This is very useful for push-pull configurations because it means you don't need two locomotives. The driver can just move to the other end of the train himself, get in the control car, and operate the locomotive that way, while still able to see in front of the train. It's an effective system, but it's not without its flaws, as became clear when it encountered the Ayrshire. Given we've already discussed how moose can do it, it's not unreasonable to expect that a cow could derail a train. They're pretty large. The incident happened on Monday, July 30th, 1984, and it was a westbound express heading from Edinburgh Waverley to Glasgow Queen Street. The train had the Class 47/7, 5 Mark III coaches, and the DBSO, which at that point during the trip was the front. At the time, the train was traveling 85 miles per hour, or 137 kilometers per hour, when the driver, John Tennant, spotted the cow. He quickly applied the emergency brakes, but he only had between 6 and 12 seconds to actually do anything about this, not nearly enough time to stop. To make matters worse, one flaw with the DBSOs was that there was a slight delay in transmission of the signal from the control car to the locomotive. So even when he hit the emergency brakes, it really didn't do much, and the Ayrshire was an adult that may have weighed up to 1,000 pounds, or 450 kilograms. As you might expect, the Ayrshire did not survive the crash, but the train did not fare much better either. It was believed that a piece of the animal, possibly a leg bone, became trapped under the leading bogie of the DBSO and lifted it off the track, causing it to derail. It turned on its side and was pushed around by the force of the train behind. The second car climbed over the rear end of the DBSO and then somersaulted end over end, striking the fifth car as it ran past. The third car also struck the DBSO. Most of the casualties were in the DBSO as well as the second car. In total, 13 people died in the accident, and 61 were injured, 17 seriously. The post-investigation sparked some controversy regarding the use of push-pull trains on British Rail. I think it's already clear that for hitting a cow, this was really bad. But it would not have been so if this was a traditional setup with the locomotive leading. For one thing, when it comes to passenger trains, a locomotive is pretty much always going to be the heaviest part of it. Had the Class 47 been leading the train when it hit the cow, it would have been a lot less likely to derail because of its significantly greater weight when compared to a simple control car. Additionally, the train would have been going slower, since had the driver applied the emergency brakes in the locomotive itself, there would not have been that transmission delay. On top of that, the fact that the Class 47 was pushing also made the damage worse when the cars derailed, because had it been leading, and even if it did derail, the locomotive would have immediately stopped moving forward. But since the cars derailed first, the Class 47 was still pushing from behind even though the rest of the train had jumped the track. This is probably what caused the second car to flip end over end. In a setup where the locomotive was leading the train, this probably wouldn't have happened. British Rail did see a need to modify the DBSOs, mainly to increase their weight to lower the risk of derailments. However, they would continue using cab control cars on the lines, and it would actually result in another accident, the Great Heck accident in 2001. But that's another story. Either way, I think it's important to stress that, as funny as it can be to imagine a cow getting stuck on the line, and as much of a joke as it's been over the years, these are big animals, and they can do some real damage. So, farmers out there, check your fences. Please don't let your cows out. Just make sure they're happy. They had enough grass? Just don't let them escape. We don't need these kind of problems. Till next time, this is Darkness. I bid you all a fond farewell.